They laughed at my $420,000 bill until the road closed. I woke up to tires on my road, my gravel, my land, and nobody even slowed down anymore. By noon, they'd put up a sign like they owned it. Then they laughed when I brought them the repair bill that kept their lake alive. That's when I stopped talking. If you've ever seen people mistake access for ownership, stay with me. This one turns. And if you respect standing your ground the right way, go ahead and subscribe. You'll want to hear how this ends. The first thing Ethan Caldwell heard that morning wasn't wind or birds or the low hum of insects rising off the water. It was tires, gravel grinding under weight. Slow, confident, like whoever was driving had done it 100 times before. Ethan opened his eyes and lay still for a second, listening. Another set of tires followed, then another. Different engines, different rhythms, same direction. His road. He swung his legs off the bed and crossed the room in 3 steps, pulling on his boots as he moved. By the time he stepped out onto the porch, the second SUV was already halfway past the gate, its driver barely glancing toward the house as it rolled through. The old wooden post beside the gate still held the sign his grandfather had nailed there decades ago. Private property, no through access. It had faded to a dull gray, the edges splintered, the letters worn but still readable if you cared enough to look. The driver didn't. Neither did the one behind him. Ethan stepped down off the porch and walked toward the road, dust lifting around his boots. The third vehicle, a black Escalade, slowed slightly as it passed him, then kept going, tires chewing into the gravel like it belonged there. He watched it climb the slight rise, crest the hill, and disappear toward the lake. 3 cars, before 8 a.m. That wasn't a mistake. That was a pattern. Ethan stood there for a moment longer, listening as the sound faded. Then he turned and looked down the length of the road. His road, stretching past the fence line, cutting through the edge of his land, and winding its way up toward the water his grandfather had dammed more than 60 years ago. That lake didn't exist by accident. Neither did the road. Every foot of gravel, every culvert, every drainage ditch, it had been put there for a reason. Built to carry weight, to survive runoff, to hold together when the spillway swelled in spring. It wasn't designed for traffic like this, and it damn sure wasn't designed to be shared without permission. Ethan walked back toward the gate, crouched, and ran his hand along the hinge post. The metal was worn smooth in places that shouldn't have been touched this often. Fresh tire tracks cut deeper into the gravel than they had last week. This wasn't new. It had just gotten bold. He stood, brushed the dust off his hands, and turned back toward the house. By the time he reached the porch, another engine was already approaching. He didn't bother stopping it this time. He just watched. By late morning, he had his answer. He drove up the road himself, following the same path those SUVs had taken, past the bend where the trees thinned out and the land opened just enough to give a clean view of the lake. The water caught the light the way it always had, flat, steady, controlled. The dam held it back just enough to keep the shoreline clean, the surface calm. From a distance, it looked like something permanent. It wasn't. Nothing about it was permanent without maintenance. Ethan slowed the truck as he came around the final curve. That's when he saw it. A new sign, bolted into the ground just off the side of the road, bright white against the dirt and brush. Community Lake Access Residents Only. The lettering was crisp, professional, not something thrown together overnight. This had been planned. He pulled the truck to a stop, engine idling, and stared at it for a long second. Then he killed the engine and stepped out. The lake was already active. 2 boats drifting near the center. A couple standing near the dock further down the shoreline. Lawn chairs set up where there hadn't been anything last month. People moved like they belonged there, like they'd always belonged there. Ethan walked over to the sign and put his hand against it. Solid, anchored deep. Whoever installed it hadn't expected it to be removed or challenged. Behind him, another vehicle rolled up and stopped. A door opened. "You're blocking the lane." The voice was sharp, controlled, used to being listened to. Ethan turned. Linda Carver stood beside her Escalade, one hand resting lightly on the door, the other holding a tablet. Sunglasses pushed up into her hair. Everything about her looked deliberate, pressed, polished, in place, like she had stepped out of a different world and planted herself here on purpose. "This isn't a lane," Ethan said, his voice even. "It's a private road." Linda smiled. Not wide, not friendly, just enough to acknowledge the statement without accepting it. "It serves the neighborhood," she replied. Ethan glanced past her at the line of vehicles forming behind the Escalade. No one honking, no one impatient, just waiting. Used to this. "How long has this been going on?" he asked. Linda stepped closer, heels crunching lightly on the gravel. "Access has been increasing," she said. "Naturally. The lake is a shared benefit." Ethan let that sit for a second. "Shared," he repeated. "By who?" Linda tilted her head slightly, as if the answer should have been obvious. "By the community," she said. "Hawthorne Lake Estates." Ethan looked back at the sign, then at the road, then at the water. None of it belonged to that name. "This land isn't part of your HOA," he said. Linda didn't argue. She didn't need to. Instead, she took a step closer, lowering her voice just enough to make it feel personal. "Ethan," she said, like they were already on familiar terms, "you have to understand how this works." He didn't respond. She gestured lightly toward the lake. "People bought homes here because of that view, because of access, because of the environment we maintain." "You don't maintain this," Ethan said. Linda's smile didn't change. "It serves the neighborhood now," she repeated. Behind her, another SUV idled. Someone checked their watch. Another driver leaned slightly to see around the Escalade, trying to understand the delay. Ethan stepped back from the sign, not because he agreed, because he understood something else. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a decision that had already been made, just not by him. He looked at Linda one more time. "You didn't ask," he said. Linda shrugged lightly. "We're informing you," she replied. The phrasing was clean, intentional, not a request, not a negotiation, a statement. Ethan nodded once, slow. Then he turned, walked back to his truck, and climbed in without another word. He started the engine, reversed just enough to clear the road, and pulled off to the side. Linda didn't thank him. She didn't need to. She got back into her Escalade and drove forward, the line of vehicles following behind her like nothing had happened, like this was normal. Ethan sat there for a moment, hands resting lightly on the wheel, watching the dust settle behind them. Then he looked up toward the lake. The water still looked calm, still looked controlled. But for the first time since he'd come back to this land, it didn't feel that way. Because control didn't come from how something looked. It came from who understood it. And right now, they were using his road and acting like it was theirs. The question wasn't whether they were wrong. It was how far they were willing to go before someone proved it. Ethan didn't go back to the house right away. He drove past the sign, past the cluster of parked cars, and kept going until the road narrowed and the trees closed in again. The gravel shifted under his tires in a way he knew by feel. Soft spots, drainage dips, places that held water longer than they should. He'd grown up learning that road the same way other people learned maps. Every inch of it mattered. At the top, where the land leveled out, the dam came into view. Low, wide, built from concrete and stone that had held steady longer than most of the houses down below had existed. Ethan parked, stepped out, and walked the length of it without rushing. At a glance, it looked fine. That was the problem. He crouched near the spillway and ran his fingers along the surface. The crack was thin, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. But it wasn't alone. A second line branched off it, and a third followed the seam where two sections met. Water had been moving through places it wasn't supposed to. Not enough to notice from a distance. Enough to matter over time. Ethan stood and looked out across the lake. From here, it still looked perfect. Boats drifting, sunlight catching the surface, clean edges along the shoreline. Nothing about it told the truth. He pulled his phone out, snapped a few photos, then walked further down along the base of the dam. The soil near the lower edge felt damp under his boots. Not soaked, just wrong. He didn't need a report to know what that meant. But he got one anyway. 3 days later, the engineer from Asheville met him on site just after noon. Older guy. Quiet. Didn't waste time with small talk. He walked the structure with Ethan, took measurements, checked moisture levels, drilled 2 core samples, and wrote notes in a pad he never let out of his hand. At one point, he tapped the side of the spillway with a metal tool and listened. That told him more than the crack. When they were done, they stood side by side looking out over the water. "How bad?" Ethan asked. The engineer didn't answer right away. He flipped a page, scanned his notes, then closed the pad. "Not failing today," he said, "but it's moving in that direction." "How long?" "Hard to say," he replied. "Depends on load, runoff, pressure cycles." He glanced back at the cracks. "But if it goes, it won't be gradual." Ethan nodded once. "What needs to be done?" The engineer didn't soften it. "Reinforce the spillway, seal the fractures, regrout the joints, waterproof the structure." He paused, then added, "Do it right, or don't do it at all." Ethan already knew what the number would be. "Give me a range." The engineer looked him straight in the eye. 400 to 420. Ethan exhaled slowly. 400,000, the man clarified. Not optional work. Structural. Ethan looked back at the lake again. 90 homes down there. More if you counted the ones further out that still used the water as a selling point. All of them tied to something they didn't even think about. Until it broke. The HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday night. Ethan showed up 10 minutes early, a folder under his arm and nothing else. The room was already half full. Folding chairs, coffee set out along one wall, a projector screen at the front that no one was using yet. People glanced at him when he walked in. Some recognized him. Most didn't. Linda Carver stood near the front, talking to 2 board members. She saw him, paused for a fraction of a second, then finished her sentence before turning his way. "Ethan," she said, as if this was expected. "Didn't realize you'd be attending." "I have something to bring to the board," he replied. She nodded lightly. "You can speak during open comments." He didn't argue that either. When the meeting started, Linda moved through the agenda like she had done it 100 times before. Landscaping updates, budget notes, a brief mention of increased lake usage framed as a positive. No mention of the road. No mention of ownership. When she finally opened the floor, Ethan stood. "I had an inspection done on the dam," he said, keeping his voice level. "The structure that holds the lake in place." That got attention. People shifted in their seats. A few turned fully toward him. Ethan stepped forward just enough to place the folder on the table. "There are fractures in the spillway," he continued. "Water intrusion, structural degradation. It needs repair." Linda folded her arms lightly. What kind of repair? She asked. Ethan opened the folder and pulled out the report. Reinforcement, sealing, regrouting, full waterproofing. And the cost? Paul Garrison, the HOA treasurer, asked from his seat. Ethan didn't hesitate. $420,000. The room reacted instantly. Low voices, a couple of short laughs. One person actually shook their head like it was a joke. Linda didn't react right away. She walked forward, took the report from the table, and flipped through the first page without really reading it. And you're bringing this to us? Why? She asked. Ethan met her gaze. Because the lake exists, because that dam holds, he said, and the road you're using runs below it. If it fails, you lose both. That quieted the room. Not completely, but enough. Ethan continued. The structure is on my land, he said, but the benefit isn't mine alone. Everyone here uses that water. Property values depend on it. Access depends on it. Paul leaned forward slightly. You're suggesting… What? A shared cost? Yes. Linda let out a short breath through her nose. Not quite a laugh yet. Ethan kept going. I'm not asking for anything unreasonable, he said. Divide the cost across the community. Set up a maintenance fund. Handle it before it becomes an emergency. Linda closed the report and placed it back on the table. Then she smiled. It wasn't polite. It wasn't neutral. It was dismissive. Ethan, she said, her tone light enough to carry across the room. That dam sits on your property. He didn't respond. She took a step back, addressing the room now. This isn't a community structure, she continued. It's a private one, owned and maintained by a private landowner. A couple of people nodded. Paul leaned back in his chair, already disengaging. Linda looked back at Ethan. That means the responsibility is yours, she said. There it was. Clean, simple, final. Ethan held her gaze. And the lake? He asked. Linda shrugged lightly. It's a natural feature at this point, she replied. One the community has grown around. Ethan didn't move. The community grew around it because it exists, he said. Linda's smile widened just a fraction. And it will continue to exist, she said, as long as you maintain it. A few quiet chuckles this time. That's when she laughed. Not loud, not out of control, just enough to make it clear she didn't take him seriously. Your land, she said, echoing her earlier tone. Your problem. The board didn't even need to vote, but they did anyway. 4 hands went up, 1 stayed down, motion carried. Ethan closed the folder slowly. No reaction, no argument, no raised voice. He picked up the report, turned, and walked back toward the door while the room moved on to the next item like nothing had just happened. Behind him, someone asked about landscaping budgets again. By the time Ethan stepped outside, the sound of conversation had already replaced him. He stood there for a second, the folder still in his hand, and looked out toward the road that led back to his land. Back to the dam. Back to the problem they had just decided didn't belong to them. He nodded once to himself. Not in agreement, in recognition. They had made their choice. The only question left was what that choice was going to cost them. Ethan didn't wait long to find out. The first letter showed up 3 days later. Certified mail. Official envelope. HOA letterhead stamped across the top like it meant something. He opened it at the kitchen counter, reading it once without reacting. Violation notice. Fence height exceeds community visual standards. He looked out the window toward the same fence that had stood there longer than most of the houses in Hawthorne Lake Estates. It hadn't changed. Only the people complaining about it had. He folded the letter once, set it aside, and went back to his coffee. The second notice came 2 days after that. Brush overgrowth. Ethan stepped outside, walked the property line, and looked at the same trees and undergrowth his grandfather had left untouched on purpose. Native growth. Not manicured. Not designed for appearance. Designed to hold soil. Control runoff. Keep the land stable. It wasn't a problem. It was a solution. But that wasn't what the letter said. He didn't respond to that one either. By the end of the week, the third notice arrived. Weathered dock structure inconsistent with community standards. That one almost made him smile. The dock wasn't new. It wasn't polished. It wasn't meant to impress anyone. It was built from thick planks that had been replaced one section at a time over decades. It worked. That was the only standard it had ever needed to meet. Ethan stacked the letters together, aligning the edges, reading the dollar amounts this time. 250, 250, 250, not enough to matter financially, just enough to establish something else. Pressure. The fourth notice came with a different tone. Obstruction of community access roadway. Ethan read that one twice. Then he walked outside and stood at the edge of the road again, watching another SUV roll past his gate without slowing down. They weren't asking anymore. They were documenting, building a case, same as him. A week later, he woke to the sound of engines again. But this time they didn't pass. They stopped. Ethan stepped out onto the porch and saw 2 trucks parked halfway up the road. White, unmarked, but not unfamiliar. Equipment racks in the back. Measuring poles, tripods, surveyors. He didn't rush. He walked down the driveway at a steady pace, hands at his sides, eyes on the men already unloading gear. One of them looked up as Ethan approached. "Morning," the man said, casual. "We'll be out of your way soon." Ethan didn't return the greeting. "Who authorized this?" he asked. The man hesitated just long enough to matter. "HOA board," he said. "We've got a work order." Ethan stopped a few feet away. "This is private property," he said. "You don't have permission to be here." The second man straightened up from the back of the truck. "We're just doing measurements," he said. "Road access, boundary alignment, drainage impact, standard stuff." "Not on my land," Ethan replied. The first man shifted his weight. "Look," he said, lowering his voice slightly. "We were told this was community access." Ethan held his gaze. "You were told wrong." Silence settled between them for a moment. Then Ethan took a step closer, not aggressive, just enough to make the boundary clear. "You need to pack it up," he said. "Now." The 2 men exchanged a glance. Neither of them argued. They'd been hired to do a job, not fight over it. Within 5 minutes, the equipment was back in the truck. As they pulled away, Ethan watched the tires cut into the gravel again, leaving fresh tracks layered over the ones that hadn't faded yet. This wasn't overreach anymore. This was escalation. That evening, Ethan drove into town. The sheriff's office sat at the edge of Main Street, quiet, functional, unchanged. He walked in, asked for a deputy, and waited. Deputy Cole Ramirez came out a few minutes later, mid-30s, steady, the kind of presence that didn't need to prove anything. "What can I do for you?" Ramirez asked. Ethan set the stack of letters on the counter. "I've got people entering my property without permission," he said. "Survey crews, hired by the HOA." Ramirez glanced down at the documents, then back up. "They didn't have your consent?" he asked. "No." "Posted signage?" "Clear as it gets." Ramirez nodded once. "That's trespassing," he said. Simple as that. No hesitation, no legal gymnastics, just fact. Ethan felt something shift. Not relief, not yet, but confirmation. "I want it documented," Ethan said. "It will be," Ramirez replied. If they come back, call it in. We'll handle it. Ethan nodded. He didn't say anything about the road. Not yet. By the time he got back to the ranch, the sun was low enough to stretch shadows across the gravel. Another car passed him on the way in. Still using the road, still acting like nothing had changed. But something had. The letters, the survey, the language. They weren't just taking advantage anymore. They were building justification. And if they were building a case, so was he. The next morning, Mike Turner showed up unannounced. Old pickup, dust-covered, parked just off the side of the road, like he knew better than to block it. Ethan stepped out onto the porch as Mike climbed out. Figured I'd come by before this gets worse, Mike said, walking up slowly. Ethan didn't ask how he knew. What are they saying? Ethan asked instead. Mike leaned against the porch railing, eyes drifting toward the road. That you're refusing to cooperate, he said. That the dam's unsafe and you're not doing anything about it. Ethan let out a quiet breath. That's not what happened. Mike nodded. I know that, he said. Not everyone else does. Another car passed behind them. Neither of them turned to look this time. They think you'll fold, Mike added. Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked past the road, past the trees, toward the direction of the dam. They've already decided how this ends, he said. Mike studied him for a second. And you haven't? He asked. Ethan turned back toward the house, the stack of letters still sitting where he'd left them. I'm just getting started, he said. Inside, he picked up the top envelope again. Violation notice. Community standard. Access road. Words printed like they meant something. He set them back down, walked past them, and headed for the room at the back of the house where his grandfather had kept everything that mattered. Old records, deeds, paperwork no one else had thought to check. If they were going to fight this with letters, he'd answer with something stronger, something older, something they hadn't bothered to read. And somewhere in those pages was the reason they were wrong. The room at the back of the house hadn't changed in decades. Same metal filing cabinet, same cedar chest pushed against the wall, same stack of binders labeled in handwriting that didn't need to be neat to be precise. Ethan pulled the chest open first. Inside, everything was organized the way his grandfather had left it. Deeds, permits, survey maps, correspondence tied together with twine instead of folders. Nothing digital, nothing easy, but nothing missing either. He sat down at the table, untied the first bundle, and started reading. The original deed dated back to 1962. Simple language, clean boundaries, clear ownership. Ethan traced the property lines with his finger as he read, following the description through tree markers and elevation changes, down to the dam, across the spillway, and back along the ridge. Every inch of land the road crossed was his. He didn't stop there. He flipped through attached documents, older letters, handwritten notes in the margins. Some were routine. Tax confirmations, survey updates, permit renewals. Then he found the addendum. It wasn't highlighted, wasn't labeled as important. Just another page attached to the original filing. Ethan leaned in and read it slowly. Once, then again. The wording was precise, not legal filler, intentional. The Hollis property grants limited access across designated roadway and water use under revocable license to surrounding residential development, contingent upon shared maintenance participation and non-hostile use. Ethan sat back slightly. There it was. Not an easement, not shared ownership. A license. Conditional. Revocable. He read the next line. Failure to contribute to reasonable maintenance or engagement in hostile action toward the property holder shall constitute grounds for immediate termination of said license. Ethan let out a quiet breath. That wasn't just protection. That was leverage, built in decades before anyone in Hawthorne Lake Estates had ever moved in. He didn't call Linda, didn't send a letter, didn't respond to a single violation notice. Instead, he drove into Charlotte the next morning and walked into a law office that had been recommended to him twice in the past week. Rachel Kim didn't keep him waiting long. Her office was clean, minimal, files stacked in exact order, no wasted space. She glanced at the documents he set down in front of her, then looked up at him. "What are we dealing with?" she asked. Ethan didn't dramatize it. "HOA thinks they control access across my land," he said. "They're issuing fines, sending survey crews, using the road like it's theirs." Rachel nodded once and pulled the deed closer. "Let's see what actually exists," she said. She read faster than he had, more precise, marking sections with a pen as she moved through the pages. When she reached the addendum, she slowed. Then she stopped. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "My grandfather kept everything," Ethan said. Rachel leaned back in her chair slightly, eyes still on the page. "They didn't read this," she said. Ethan didn't respond. He already knew that. Rachel tapped the document lightly. "This isn't an easement," she said. "This is a revocable license." "I figured that part out," Ethan replied. She nodded. "But do you understand what that means legally?" Ethan held her gaze. "It means they don't have a permanent right to use it." "It means more than that," Rachel said. She flipped the page back and pointed to the clause. "Access is conditional," she continued. "Maintenance, contribution, and non-hostile use. Both conditions have to be met." Ethan thought about the meeting, the fines, the survey crews, the letters. "They're not meeting either one," he said. Rachel's expression didn't change. "No," she replied. "They're not." She closed the file slowly. "Which means," she continued, "you can revoke the license." The room went quiet for a second. Not dramatic, just real. Ethan sat there, letting the weight of it settle. "What happens if I do?" he asked. Rachel didn't soften it. "They lose legal access," she said, "to the road, to the lake, everything tied to that license." Ethan looked down at the document again. 90 homes, every one of them tied to something they didn't own. "Can they fight it?" he asked. "They can try," Rachel said. "But if the language holds, and it does, they're on weak ground." She paused, then added, "Especially if you document hostile behavior and refusal to contribute to maintenance." Ethan almost smiled at that. "That part won't be hard." Rachel slid the file back toward him. "Then the question isn't whether you can revoke it," she said. "It's whether you're willing to." Ethan didn't answer right away. He drove back out of the city in silence, the file sitting on the passenger seat beside him. By the time he turned onto the dirt road leading back to his property, the sun was low enough to throw long shadows across the gravel. Another car passed him on the way in, then another, still using it, still assuming, still not knowing. He parked near the gate and stepped out, looking at the sign again. Community Lake Access Residents Only. It looked permanent, official, like something backed by authority. But it wasn't. Not really. Ethan reached into the truck, pulled out the folder, and flipped it open to the page Rachel had marked. The language hadn't changed. It didn't need to. He read the line one more time. Revocable license. Termination upon failure to contribute. He closed the folder and looked down the road as another SUV approached, slowing just enough to pass him before continuing up toward the lake. They weren't asking. They weren't negotiating. They were taking, and they were doing it under the assumption that nothing would stop them. Ethan turned back toward the house, the decision already forming. He didn't need to argue, didn't need to convince anyone. He just needed to act. Because if access had been granted, it could be taken back. And for the first time since this started, he knew exactly how. Ethan didn't send the revocation notice that day. He didn't send it the next day either. Instead, he waited. Not out of hesitation, but timing. Because the clause in the deed didn't just give him the right to act, it required him to prove why. And that meant documentation. The next violation notice arrived on Monday, then another on Tuesday. By Wednesday, they weren't even spacing them out anymore. Obstruction of community roadway, failure to comply with visual standards, unauthorized restriction of shared access. The language had shifted. Less suggestion, more assumption. Ethan laid them out across the table, one beside the other, reading them not for what they said, but for what they revealed. They weren't just trying to pressure him. They were rewriting the narrative, turning his property into their infrastructure, turning his silence into consent. He picked up his phone and started recording. Not video, not confrontations, just time-stamped entries. Date, time, activity. 7:12 a.m. 3 vehicles entered property without permission. 9:46 a.m. SUV parked near spillway. Occupants accessed shoreline. 2:03 p.m. 2 residents walking along road, bypassing posted sign. Every entry clean, factual. No emotion, just evidence. By Thursday, he had cameras up. 2 at the gate, 1 halfway up the road, 1 facing the dam. Not hidden, not aggressive, just visible enough to make a point, if anyone was paying attention. Most weren't. The notice went out Friday morning, 14 pages, drafted by Rachel Kim, filed with the county before it ever reached the HOA. Ethan read it once before sending, then he signed it. The language was direct, no accusations, no threats, just terms. The Hollis property hereby revokes all previously granted access licenses effective 30 days from the date of filing. Said revocation is based on documented failure to contribute to reasonable maintenance obligations and repeated hostile actions against the property holder. It listed everything. The rejected repair request, the violation notices, the unauthorized survey, the trespassing complaint, each one cited, each one backed by record. At the bottom, one line stood out. Continued use of the roadway beyond the effective date will constitute unauthorized entry onto private property. Ethan sealed the envelope, handed it over at the post office, and walked out without looking back. The reaction came faster than he expected. By Saturday afternoon, his phone had 2 missed calls from unknown numbers. By evening, it had 5. He didn't return any of them. Sunday morning, an email arrived. Subject line, urgent, HOA legal response. He opened it. The message was short. The HOA does not recognize your claim of exclusive control over the access road. Any attempt to restrict community use will be challenged legally. No signature, no direct contact, just posturing. Ethan closed the email and set the phone down. They weren't addressing the deed. They weren't disputing the clause. They were denying it existed. That told him everything he needed to know. Monday afternoon, a black SUV pulled up at the gate and stopped. Ethan was already outside when the door opened. Linda Carver stepped out, sunglasses in place, expression controlled but tighter than before. She didn't walk toward him immediately. She looked at the cameras first, then the sign, then the road. Only then did she approach. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" she asked. Ethan didn't move from where he stood. Documenting, he replied. Linda stopped a few feet away. You sent a legal notice, she said. Revoking access. Yes, she let out a short breath. That's not how this works. Ethan met her gaze. That's exactly how it works. Linda's jaw tightened. This road serves 90 homes, she said. You don't get to shut it down because you're upset about a board decision. Ethan didn't respond to the tone. He responded to the assumption. It serves 90 homes because it was allowed to, he said. Not because it belongs to them. Linda took a step closer. You're going to create a situation you can't control, she said. Ethan didn't raise his voice. It's already controlled, he replied. She glanced past him toward the house, then back at the road. You're making a mistake, she said. Ethan shook his head once. No, he said. You did that at the meeting. Silence stretched between them. Behind her, another car approached, slowed, then stopped when it saw the standoff. The driver waited. Linda didn't turn. 30 days, she said finally. You really think you're going to cut off access to an entire community? Ethan held her gaze. I think I gave you a chance to prevent it, he said. Linda's expression shifted. Just slightly. Not doubt. Not yet. But something close. You're bluffing, she said. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because if he was, he would have argued. He would have explained. He would have tried to convince her. Instead, he just stood there. Quiet. Certain. And that was the part she couldn't read. Linda turned back toward her SUV, irritation sharper now, heels digging into the gravel as she walked. Before she got in, she paused. This isn't over, she said without turning. Ethan nodded once. I know. She drove off without another word. The car behind her followed. Then another. Traffic resumed. Like nothing had changed. But everything had. That night, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with the file open in front of him. Deed, addendum, revocation notice, every piece in place. No gaps, no uncertainty. He didn't feel anger, didn't feel doubt. Just clarity, 30 days. That was the timeline. Not for him, for them. Because once it expired, there wouldn't be anything left to argue about. Only consequences. And for the first time since they put that sign up, those consequences were already in motion. But the HOA didn't slow down. They doubled down. By the second week, the tone changed. The violation notices stopped pretending to be routine. The language hardened. Legal phrasing replaced casual enforcement. Unauthorized interference with community infrastructure. Intent to restrict established access. Failure to comply may result in further legal action. Ethan read each one once, then added it to the stack. They weren't backing off. They were preparing for a fight they didn't fully understand. Midweek, another truck showed up. Not surveyors this time. Contractors. Ethan saw them from the porch before they even parked. 3 men, tool belts, measuring gear, one carrying a clipboard with printed diagrams. They stepped out like they belonged there, like they had permission. Ethan walked down to meet them. Morning, one of them said. We're here to assess the road. Who sent you? Ethan asked. HOA board, the man replied. We've got instructions to evaluate improvements, grading, widening, possibly paving sections. Ethan didn't move. You're not doing that here, he said. The man hesitated. We're just looking, he said. No work yet. That's not the point. Ethan stepped closer, not aggressive, just direct. This is private property, he said. You don't have authorization. The second man shifted, glancing back at the truck. "We were told—" "I know what you were told," Ethan cut in. "It was wrong." Silence. Same as before. The difference now was timing. They packed up faster this time. No argument, no pushback. But as they drove off, one of them made a call before the truck even cleared the gate. Ethan watched it happen. Word was moving. That afternoon, Mike Turner pulled in again. This time, he didn't lean against the railing. He stayed standing, arms crossed, looking down the road. "They're talking," Mike said. "About what?" Ethan asked. "You," Mike replied. "About what you're planning." Ethan didn't correct him. "What are they saying?" he asked instead. Mike let out a short breath. "That you're trying to hold the neighborhood hostage," he said. "That you're going to shut down access and tank property values." Ethan nodded slightly. "They're not wrong about the second part," he said. Mike looked at him. "You serious?" Ethan didn't answer directly. "I gave them a number," he said. "They made a decision." Mike shook his head once. "They don't think you'll actually follow through," he said. Ethan looked past him toward the road, where another car rolled by without slowing. "They've made that clear," he said. Mike studied him for a second longer. "You're not bluffing, are you?" Ethan met his gaze. "No." Mike nodded slowly. Then he stepped back toward his truck. "Then they're in more trouble than they think," he said. By the third week, the calls started getting louder. Not to Ethan, to each other. Neighbors stopping in the street. Conversations cutting short when certain people walked by. Questions that didn't have answers yet. The lake still looked the same. The road still functioned. But something underneath had shifted. Doubt. The HOA meeting that week was closed. No open comments. No public discussion. But the outcome didn't stay private for long. By morning, copies of an internal notice were circulating. Ethan didn't get it directly. Mike brought it. "They're planning legal action," Mike said, handing over the printout. Ethan read it once. HOA Board Resolution. Authorization to pursue legal remedies against unlawful restriction of community access. No mention of the deed. No acknowledgement of the license. Just assumption. "They're going to try to stop you in court," Mike said. Ethan folded the paper once. "Then they should have read the document first," he replied. That same afternoon, Rachel called. "They're moving," she said without preamble. "I figured," Ethan replied. "They're filing for a temporary injunction," she continued, "trying to block the revocation before it takes effect." Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair. "Do they have a basis?" he asked. Rachel didn't hesitate. "No." That answer was simple. Clean. "Then what's the play?" Ethan asked. "Delay," she said. "Confusion. Pressure. If they can make it look uncertain, they buy time." Ethan looked down at the calendar on the table. 3 weeks left. "They don't have time," he said. Rachel paused for a second. "No," she agreed. "They don't." 2 days later, the court response came back. Denied. No injunction. No delay. The revocation stood. Ethan didn't celebrate. He didn't call anyone. He just read the document once and then added it to the file. Another piece. Another confirmation. That evening, Linda showed up again. No SUV this time. Just her. She walked up the driveway without waiting, stopping halfway between the house and the road. Ethan stepped outside to meet her. "You're pushing this too far," she said. Her voice was tighter now, less controlled. Ethan didn't respond. "They denied the injunction," she continued. "That doesn't mean you're right." "It means I'm allowed to proceed," he said. Linda shook her head. "You're going to damage this entire community," she said. Ethan looked at her evenly. I offered to protect it, he replied. You declined. Linda took a step closer. This isn't about the dam anymore, she said. Ethan held her gaze. It always was. Silence. Then she said it. You think you can shut down access to 90 homes, she said. Just like that? Ethan didn't answer right away. He let the weight of the question sit between them. Then he spoke. No, he said. Not just like that. Linda waited. Ethan's voice didn't change. 30 days, he said. That was it. No explanation, no warning, just the timeline. Linda stared at him for a long second. Then she turned and walked back toward the road. This time, she didn't look at the sign. She didn't look at the cameras. She didn't look back at him at all. Ethan stood there until her car disappeared. Then he looked down the road again. Same gravel, same traffic, same pattern. Nothing had changed on the surface. But underneath, everything was shifting. Because now it wasn't just him preparing. It was them reacting. And they were reacting without understanding what they were reacting to. Which meant when it finally hit, it wouldn't feel like a decision. It would feel like something being taken away. Because that's exactly what it was. And they still thought it wasn't going to happen. Day 30 came and went without ceremony. Cars still used the road. Boats still drifted on the lake. Linda still sent emails, longer now, sharper, filled with language about liability, community rights, and ongoing review. Nothing stopped. Nothing slowed. Which was exactly why Ethan didn't act on day 30. He waited. Because timing wasn't about the deadline. It was about the moment they stopped believing it was real. Day 31 started before sunrise. Ethan was already awake, not pacing, not checking the clock, just ready. He stepped outside with a mug of coffee and stood at the edge of the porch, watching the road as the sky shifted from black to gray. No traffic yet. For the first time in weeks, it was quiet. Then he heard it. Not tires, engines. Multiple. Coming in slow, heavy, official. Ethan set the mug down on the railing and walked toward the gate. 2 sheriff's trucks rolled into view, headlights cutting through the dust as they approached the entrance to the road. They didn't stop at the house. They stopped at the line where gravel met the county marker, right where private became obvious, if you knew how to read it. Deputy Cole Ramirez stepped out first. Same steady posture, same measured pace. He didn't look surprised to see Ethan already there. You ready? Ramirez asked. Ethan nodded once. That's why you're here. Ramirez gave a small acknowledgement, then turned back to the truck and motioned to the second deputy. They moved with purpose. No hesitation, no discussion. From the back of the truck, they pulled out 2 metal barricades and carried them into position across the width of the road. One at the entrance, one just beyond it. Clear, unavoidable. Ethan watched without speaking as they set them down and locked them into place. Then Ramirez pulled a document from his folder and clipped it to the front of the barricade. Official notice, visible from a distance. This effective immediately? Ramirez asked. It was effective yesterday, Ethan replied. Ramirez nodded. Then we're just enforcing it. The first car showed up 10 minutes later. A silver SUV. Same driver as before. Same routine. Except this time, when she reached the gate, she stopped. Engine idling. Confusion first. Then hesitation. She leaned forward slightly, reading the notice clipped to the barricade. Then she opened her door and stepped out. What is this? She asked, not really to anyone. Ramirez stepped forward. "Road is closed," he said. The driver blinked. "Closed? I live here." Ramirez didn't raise his voice. "This is private property," he said. "Access has been revoked." She looked past him toward Ethan. "Is this some kind of mistake?" she asked. Ethan didn't move. No. That was all he gave her. Behind her, another car pulled up, then another. Within minutes, a line formed. Engines idling, doors opening, people stepping out, trying to understand what they were looking at. Confusion spread faster than the dust. By the time Linda arrived, the road was backed up to the bend. She didn't slow down. She drove straight to the front of the line, stopped hard enough to kick up gravel, and stepped out before the engine even cut. "What is this?" she demanded. Not to Ethan, to Ramirez. "This is obstruction of a community roadway," she said. "Remove it." Ramirez didn't react to the tone. He simply gestured toward the notice. "Ma'am, this is a private road," he said. "Access rights have been legally revoked." Linda didn't even glance at the paper. "That's not valid," she snapped. "We've already filed legal action." "Your injunction was denied," Ramirez replied calmly. That stopped her. Not for long, but enough. She turned toward Ethan. "You actually did it," she said. Not disbelief. Not yet. Just irritation sharpened into something more focused. Ethan met her gaze. "I told you I would." Linda took a step closer. "You can't just cut off access to 90 homes," she said. Ethan didn't respond immediately. He let the noise behind her build, voices rising, questions being asked, frustration starting to turn. Then he spoke. "I didn't cut anything off," he said. "You lost access when you refused to maintain it." Linda shook her head. "This isn't how property works," she said. Ethan's voice stayed level. "It is when you don't own it." Behind them, the situation was changing. People were starting to understand. Not fully, but enough. Phones came out. Calls were being made. One man stepped forward, pointing at the barricade. "I've got a boat down there," he said. "You expect me to just leave it?" Ramirez answered before Ethan could. "You can access your property by other legal routes," he said. "Not this one." "There is no other route," the man shot back. Ramirez didn't argue. "That's not my jurisdiction," he said. That was the moment it shifted. From inconvenience to consequence. Linda saw it too. She turned back toward Ethan, voice lower now. "You're creating a liability issue," she said. "Emergency access alone. You should have thought about that," Ethan said, cutting her off for the first time. The interruption landed. Clean. Direct. No anger. Just fact. Linda stared at him for a second, something behind her expression finally cracking. "You're going to regret this," she said. Ethan shook his head once. "No," he replied. "You are." The line of cars wasn't moving anymore. It wasn't even trying. People stood in small groups now, talking, arguing, trying to piece together what had just happened, because it didn't feel like a decision. It felt like something had been taken, something they thought was permanent, something they had built around without ever confirming it belonged to them. Ethan stepped back from the road, giving Ramirez space to handle the rest. The barricades held. The notice stayed in place. And the road, for the first time since this started, was empty. From the ridge above, the lake still looked the same. Calm. Still. Untouched. But everything that led to it had changed. And now, they were finally starting to understand it. Not all at once. Not cleanly. But enough. By mid-morning, the line of cars had turned into clusters of people. Phones were out. Calls were being made. Voices were rising. Not at Ethan, not even at the deputies anymore, but at each other. What do you mean we can't get through? Call the board. This has to be illegal. No one had a clear answer, because for the first time, they were being forced to ask a question they had never considered before. Who actually owns this? Rachel Kim arrived just before noon. She didn't rush, didn't try to cut through the crowd. She parked off to the side, stepped out with a folder in hand, and walked straight toward Ethan and Deputy Ramirez like this was exactly where she expected to be. Linda saw her immediately. "Of course," she said under her breath, loud enough to carry. "You brought a lawyer." Rachel didn't react to the tone. She simply stopped a few feet away, opened the folder, and looked at the group gathered around the barricade. "I'm here to clarify," she said. No raised voice, no performance, just precision. Linda crossed her arms. "There's nothing to clarify," she said. "This is an unlawful restriction of community access." Rachel nodded slightly, as if acknowledging the statement without agreeing to it. "Then we'll keep it simple," she said. She pulled out the document and held it up, not dramatically, just enough for those closest to see. "This road," she began, "is located entirely on property deeded to Ethan Caldwell in 1962. A few people shifted. One man frowned. "That doesn't mean he can block it," someone said from the back. Rachel didn't look at him. "It does," she replied. Then she turned a page. "What you've been using is not an easement," she continued. "It is a revocable license." That word landed, not loudly, but clearly. Linda stepped forward. "That's not accurate," she said. "The community has had access for decades." Rachel met her gaze. "Access granted," she said, "not ownership established." Linda shook her head. "That's semantics." Rachel didn't hesitate. "No," she said, "it's law." The crowd quieted just enough to listen. Rachel pointed to a line on the document. "The license allows use of the roadway and lake access under 2 conditions," she said. "Shared maintenance contribution and non-hostile use." A pause. Then she continued. "Both conditions have been violated." That shifted something. Not fully, but enough. "What does that mean?" someone asked. Rachel answered without softening it. "It means the license is no longer valid." Linda stepped in again. "You're twisting language to justify a unilateral action," she said. Rachel turned the page back toward her. "I'm reading it exactly as written," she replied. Linda didn't take the paper, didn't even look at it. "Even if that were true," she said, "you can't just shut down access overnight." Rachel's expression didn't change. "It wasn't overnight," she said. "It was 30 days' notice, filed with the county, documented, and unchallenged in court." That landed harder, because it wasn't just a claim, it was a timeline, a process, a fact. Behind them, someone spoke up again. "So what happens now?" the man asked. Rachel turned slightly, addressing the question without shifting her stance. "Now," she said, "the road is closed to unauthorized use." "And the lake?" someone else asked. Rachel didn't hesitate. "Access to the lake from this route is no longer permitted." That was the moment it broke. Not completely, but enough to change the tone. Because until then, people had assumed this was temporary, a dispute, something that would resolve itself if they pushed hard enough. Now it sounded permanent. Linda felt it. She stepped forward again, voice sharper now. "This is going to collapse property values," she said. "You're destroying the community over a maintenance dispute." Ethan finally spoke. "It stopped being a maintenance dispute when you refused to maintain it," he said. Linda turned toward him. "You're using this as leverage," she said. Ethan nodded once. Yes. No denial, no spin, just acknowledgement. And that hit harder than anything else he could have said, because it reframed everything. Not as an accident, not as an overreaction, but as a controlled response. Paul Garrison pushed his way forward from the back of the crowd. He looked different than he had at the meeting, less certain, more aware. "You're saying we never had rights to the road?" he asked Rachel. Rachel answered directly. "You had permission," she said. "Conditional, revocable." Paul looked at Linda. "You told us this was covered," he said. Linda didn't answer immediately, because there wasn't an easy answer. That silence spread, from one person to another, from assumption to doubt. Ethan stepped back slightly, letting the conversation move without him. He didn't need to push it, didn't need to explain more, because the document was doing that for him. Line by line, clause by clause. A woman near the front spoke next. "So if we can't use this road, what are we supposed to do?" No one answered right away, because there wasn't a simple solution. Not anymore. Rachel closed the folder. "That's a question for your board," she said. Then she turned slightly toward Ethan. "We've clarified the legal position," she added. Ethan nodded once. That was enough. The crowd didn't disperse, not yet, but the energy had changed. Less confrontation, more realization, because now they understood something they hadn't before. They hadn't been losing access to a shared resource. They had been losing access to something they never owned. And for the first time since this started, they weren't arguing with Ethan anymore. They were looking at each other, trying to figure out who had gotten it wrong, and what it was going to cost them. The answer didn't take long to surface. By that afternoon, the calls started shifting direction, not toward Ethan, toward the HOA. Paul Garrison was the first to break. He didn't wait for another meeting. Didn't wait for Linda to control the room. He drove straight to Ethan's gate just before sunset, parked off to the side, and walked up slowly, alone. Ethan stepped out onto the porch as he approached. Paul didn't waste time. "How much?" he asked. Ethan didn't pretend not to understand. "For the repairs," Paul added. "The dam." Ethan looked at him for a moment. $420,000, he said. Paul exhaled, running a hand across the back of his neck. "And that fixes it?" he asked. "It stabilizes it," Ethan replied. "Prevents failure, keeps the road intact, keeps the lake where it is." Paul nodded slowly. "And the legal fees?" he asked. Ethan didn't soften it. "They're part of the cost now." Paul looked down at the gravel, processing. "We could have handled this months ago," he said quietly. Ethan didn't respond, because that wasn't new information. It was just finally being said out loud. That night, the emergency HOA meeting was called. Not scheduled, not planned, forced. Word spread fast. By the time Ethan arrived, the room was already full. More people than the original meeting, standing along the walls, packed into corners, no one interested in procedure anymore. Linda was already at the front. But she didn't look in control. Not like before. Not like the woman who had laughed. The meeting started without formality. Voices overlapping, questions cutting through each other. "What are we supposed to do now?" "You told us this was covered." "My house backs onto that lake. What happens to value?" Linda raised her hand, trying to regain structure. "Everyone needs to calm down," she said. No one did. Paul stepped forward before she could continue. "You need to explain the deed," he said. Linda's expression tightened. There's nothing to explain, she replied. We are reviewing the legal interpretation. That's not an answer, Paul cut in. The interruption landed, because it wasn't emotional. It was direct. And it came from inside the board. Linda shifted her focus toward Ethan when he stepped into the room. There he is, she said. The one creating the problem. That pulled attention back. All eyes turned. Ethan didn't rush forward, didn't take the front. He stopped halfway into the room, letting the space hold. Then he spoke. I didn't create anything, he said. I responded to it. Linda shook her head. You shut down access to an entire community, she said. Ethan didn't argue that. I gave you a solution first, he replied. He pulled the repair estimate from the folder in his hand and held it up. 420,000, he said. Shared across 90 homes. That's less than 5,000 per property. The room quieted, because that number was different now. Before, it sounded large. Now, it sounded like something they should have paid. Linda stepped forward again. This is coercion, she said. You're forcing compliance by restricting access. Ethan met her gaze. I'm enforcing the terms you ignored, he said. That line landed harder than anything else, because it wasn't defensive. It was factual. Rachel stepped in beside him, handing out copies of the deed. No speeches, no theatrics, just paper moving from hand to hand. People reading, actually reading, for the first time. Paul took one copy and flipped straight to the clause. His finger paused on the line. Revocable license. He looked up at Linda. You knew about this? He asked. Linda didn't answer. Not right away. Because there wasn't a version of that answer that worked. The room shifted again. Not loud, not chaotic. Just a collective recalibration. Because now it wasn't about Ethan versus the HOA. It was about what the HOA had told them, versus what was actually written. A man near the back spoke up. So what happens if we don't fix it? He asked. Ethan answered before anyone else could. The road stays closed, he said. The dam continues to degrade. Eventually, it fails. Silence. And the lake? Someone else asked. Ethan didn't soften that either. It doesn't stay a lake. That was the moment it hit. Fully. Not as a possibility, as a consequence. Linda tried one more time. This is exaggerated, she said. There are other options. There were, Ethan said, cutting her off again. This time the interruption didn't feel out of place, because the room had shifted away from her. They were presented, he continued. They were rejected. He lowered the paper back down. This is what's left. Paul stepped forward again. This isn't sustainable, he said, not to Ethan, but to the room. No, Ethan replied. It's not. The vote didn't take long. It didn't follow procedure. It didn't wait for formal motions. It happened because the room needed it to. Remove her, someone said. Another voice seconded it. Hands went up. Not all at once, but enough. More than enough. Linda looked around the room, waiting for someone to push back. No one did. Because at that point, it wasn't about her anymore. She didn't argue, didn't defend. She just stepped back, grabbed her bag, and walked out without another word. The door closed behind her. And just like that, the control she thought she had was gone. Paul turned back toward Ethan. What does it take to fix this? He asked. Ethan didn't change the number. 420,000, he said, plus legal costs. Paul nodded once. We'll cover it. he said. No hesitation. No negotiation, because now they understood the cost of not doing it. Ethan didn't respond immediately. He let the room settle, let the shift complete. Then he nodded. That's all it ever was, he said. Outside, the road was still blocked. The lake was still calm. Nothing physical had changed. But everything that mattered had. Because now, the decision had finally moved from assumption to understanding, and from understanding to action. The next morning, the barricades were still in place, not as a threat anymore, as a reminder. Ethan stood at the edge of the road as the first truck from the repair crew rolled in, this time with permission, paperwork, and a signed agreement filed with the county the night before. Deputy Ramirez was there again, not to enforce anything, just to witness the change. Looks different today, he said. Ethan nodded once. Same road, he replied. Different terms. By noon, the paperwork was complete. The HOA had transferred the full repair amount into escrow, $420,000, plus legal costs, documented and binding. Rachel stood beside Ethan as they reviewed the final agreement. Maintenance fund established, she said, scanning the page. Annual contributions required. No access without compliance. Ethan looked at the line. This time, it wasn't a clause buried in a document no one had read. It was front and center. Clear. Enforced. Permanent. They won't ignore it again, Rachel added. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. The barricades came down an hour later. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Ramirez and the second deputy unlocked them, lifted them aside, and set them off the shoulder of the road. No announcement. No signal. Just removal. The first car didn't move right away. The driver waited. Watched. Like they expected something else to happen. Then, slowly, the engine rolled forward. Tires touched gravel again. This time different. Measured. Aware. By the end of the day, the road was active again. But quieter. No rushing. No assumption. Every car slowed at the gate now, even without the barricade. Every driver looked. Not at the sign. At the land. At the road. At what it actually was. The repair work started the following week. Crews moved in with equipment built for precision, not speed. Sections of the spillway were stripped, reinforced, sealed. The cracks that had been ignored were opened, cleaned, repaired the right way. Ethan walked the dam with the lead engineer on the second day. Caught it in time, the man said. Another season, maybe 2. Wouldn't have held. Ethan looked out across the water. The lake was still there, still calm. But now it meant something different. Not just a feature. A responsibility. Mike Turner showed up that afternoon, leaning against his truck the same way he always had. Hell of a way to make a point, he said. Ethan glanced at him. They made it for me, he replied. Mike nodded. Yeah, he said. They did. He looked down the road, where another car slowed at the gate before passing through. They're different now, Mike added. Ethan followed his gaze. Good, he said. Paul came by 2 days later. No clipboard, no formal tone, just direct. We set up the maintenance fund, he said. Annual contributions, mandatory, no exceptions. Ethan nodded. That's how it should have been. Paul hesitated for a second. We should have listened earlier, he said. Ethan didn't disagree. He just said what mattered. You didn't. Paul let that sit, then nodded once. No, he said. We didn't. Linda never came back. Word was she sold the house within the month. Didn't stay long enough to see the repairs finished. Didn't stay long enough to watch the system she built get replaced by something better. Ethan didn't think about her much after that, because she wasn't the reason the road worked again. The terms were. By late summer, the dam was complete, reinforced, sealed, stable. The water level held exactly where it was supposed to. The road beneath it stayed dry, strong, unchanged on the surface, but completely different underneath. One evening, Ethan stood at the edge of the lake as the light dropped behind the ridge. His daughter stood beside him, skipping a rock across the surface. It hit once, twice, then sank. "Is it over?" she asked. Ethan thought about that for a second. Then he answered honestly. "It's stable," he said. She nodded, satisfied with that. The road behind them was quiet. No line of cars, no noise, just gravel, holding where it was placed, doing exactly what it was designed to do, because now, the people using it understood something they hadn't before. Not because they were told, not because they were forced, but because they saw what happened when they didn't. Ethan looked out across the water one more time, then back toward the road. "They thought authority meant control," he said quietly. His daughter glanced up at him. "What does it mean?" she asked. Ethan watched a car slow at the gate, then continue through. "It means nothing," he said, "if you don't own what you're trying to control." The lake held, the road held, and this time, so did the understanding, because the difference between using something and owning it was no longer a question. It was a fact they had already paid for.
What this really comes down to is simple. If you benefit from something, you share responsibility for it. Ignoring that doesn't make the obligation disappear. It just delays the moment when reality catches up. Ethan didn't force anything new into existence. He simply held the line on what has always been written and let the truth speak for itself when it's mattered. There's a quiet kind of strength in that, not raising your voice, not rushing into conflict, but knowing exactly where you stand and being willing to stay there until others see it too. In the end, nothing was taken. What was already there was just understood properly for the first time. If you ever deal with an HOA or found yourself standing your ground when no one else wanted to listen, go ahead and drop yes in the comments. I'd be interested to hear how you handle it. And if stories like this resonate with you, real situation, real pressure, and people holding steady when it counts, consider subscribing. There's more coming, and I think you want to be here for it.